Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, welcome once again to HR Voices podcast. I am your host, Mary Asante, and with me here is the amazing Charlie Goodman. Hi Charlie.
Hi Mary, great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thank you for joining us. And Charlie is here to talk to us today about financial well-being. But before we dive in, for the sake of people listening who may not have heard Charlie the first time he joined us as a guest on the show, I will allow him to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Mary. Well, my background or my current role is working with pensions and financial well-being for employers and their general wider employee benefits. I've been working in this kind of role for about 15 years now. And prior to that, I worked as a financial advisor to high net worth individuals, helping them understand how to plan their own investments and their retirement. I have been working now with SME employers specifically, mostly for the last decade, particularly since automatic enrolment began, which meant all of the employers had to have workplace pensions. My interest, though, and the reason I moved across from working as a financial advisor to working in reward and employee benefits was, why do people not necessarily take up great offers? And in this case, the particular story I usually come back to is around pension contributions. Why do people not take these very good benefits up when they are offered? And that began my interest in understanding people's financial behaviour. And that in turn led to the interest in financial well-being and general well-being.
Excellent. Thank you for the background information, Charlie. And I think for the purposes of today, I'd like us to focus on financial well-being. I think 11th of May marked Mental Health Awareness Week, the start of it. But we all know mental well-being is not just a day thing. Yeah, our mental health is an everyday, is 365 days a year. It's not a day or a week's thing. So I think it's quite important, the financial aspects of it, for us to discuss, because a lot of people do get stressed, not just by work or not just by life, but mostly by finance, especially given the current economic climate that we are in, with the cost of living skyrocketing and everything. It is quite important, I feel, for us to address the issue of financial well-being.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard today, although I'm now going to date this podcast, but we've heard today that the government was looking to supermarkets to fix food prices for certain essential goods. And at the same time, which was in smaller print, we've actually seen inflation drop to its lowest rate. But as many of you who follow various financial bloggers and journalists will know, although the rate of inflation has dropped, that still means it's increasing. So I think the rate of inflation fell to 2.8%, but that still means the cost of everything is going up on average by 2.8% each month. So although good news, it's slowed, the rate at which everything's getting more expensive, it's still getting more expensive. So I think this is like mental well-being. In fact, all elements of well-being, something that's ongoing. It is very much a topic that employers are coming back to us fairly frequently.
Yeah. And I think if we are going to be talking about what are some of the I would like to say signs that somebody within our workplace is potentially struggling financially?
I think that's a good question. I
Mm.
think, like mental health, you're not necessarily going to see them.
Mm.
Uh, we know, and again, there's been plenty of research around this, and again, probably quite a lot of comment that people have seen, that people do not like and are not used to talking about money. And that's even in a positive way. I mean, typically, although I know many of us are working to change things, people don't know what other people are necessarily being paid. We don't like discussing salary details, even when we're offering people or
We
advertising jobs.
yeah. When we
Yeah.
can openly, when legally we can openly discuss our salaries and everything at work, people just don't like talking about it. It's still quite a taboo subject type thing, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think more crucially, if you work within an organization where you have an idea of whether because it's a new role or your pay structure is on a scale basis, etc., and you may have an idea of what people might be earning, I think it's quite important to also highlight that the fact that you know how much someone is earning doesn't mean they may not be struggling financially.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I think 2 points. So much of our status, both internally and externally, is linked to money because it's a bit like a video game. It's like a score, and it's easy to compare that score in a very simplistic manner and think, well, because X is earning this amount and Y is earning something else, that somehow they're doing better at life. It's a very easy kind of comparator, but actually a very a comparator that's very fallible once you start scraping away at what's underneath. So, I mean, interestingly, and this has come at quite a good time, Mary. The
Mm.
company I'm currently working for, everyone has just done some research or just sponsored the research for the CIPD this year
Right.
on financial well-being.
Mm.
And on that very point, we see from those survey results, around about 38% of low-paid workers are feeling it in terms of financial difficulties, but we still find around about 23% of higher earners. So those that fall into the higher tax brackets are equally feeling it. And even before we did this research, there have been several studies over the last couple of decades that have shown that as our earnings grow, typically, so do our expectations
Expenditure, yeah.
and expenditure. So yeah, I can say from lived experience of working with employees and even those high net worth individuals from before, there is we may be in different boats, but most of us are in the same sea, as I think we famously used to say during
Mm.
COVID. So I think one of the mistakes, or one of it that I see when I'm talking to employees, is their assumption that these people, their higher earners, are okay. They'd be surprised.
And I think that is the reality, isn't it? The fact that if someone can be on 30 grand a year and will be living comfortably, while
Mm.
someone might be on 120K a year and will be struggling. So the
Mm.
whole idea of financial well-being is something that applies to a lot of people, and actually it's almost on a scale, isn't it? How it impacts some people might be far worse than how it impacts others. So within the workplace, what can an employer do to support their employees' financial well-being?
I would say there are many things. I think the starting point, as with anything that we're trying to achieve, any goal we're trying to achieve, is to define what problem we're trying to solve and how we think we could measure a point of success in solving that problem, and then actually having a plan. Because that's the big issue here, is that I think I see a lot of, and we get a lot of, and I have historically had a lot of employers come to me and HR consultants and say to me, "Oh, we'd really like you to come in and give a talk on pensions or on financial well-being," and I know I'm going to deliver a good talk, and I know I'm going to give people information they perhaps haven't had before. But one talk isn't going to dramatically change the course of things for those people. Maybe for one or two, but we need generally, or there needs to be some kind of sustained change and some sustained strategy that goes beyond. It isn't just a case of doing a webinar or a workshop. It's also having a more longer term thought around it, regular communications, regular thoughts around exactly what you're trying to achieve. And like many goals, I would suggest it's starting small. But the first and major point I would say is you need to clearly identify the problems you're trying to solve, what success looks like, and then plan it out. Now, we again found less than half of large corporates have a financial well-being strategy. When you look at SMEs, which again I know is the market a lot of the members of HRI will work in, it's less than 15%. Now, this doesn't surprise me because, again, as someone, a reward professional, you ask how many companies have or employers have a reward strategy, and again, certainly SME market, we know that many are missing. I think part of this can come from, and again, if you've had experience of trying to get these kind of policies or strategies in place, part of it comes from everyone going, "Oh, that's going to be really complicated. It's going to take us loads of time," all this kind of thing. And that's actually where I would say to people, the good news is it doesn't have to. I think it can be on one page. It can be half a page. I think the clear thing is just being clear what you're trying to do. What is your goal? And I try and keep that goal realistic. You're not going to suddenly turn around everyone's financial situations. Where I really think we can help, or employers can help employees, is just making sure they know how the employer's supporting them. And most employers will be at least delivering a pension scheme, if not a life assurance policy or income protection, maybe some sort of healthcare policy. You might have access to things like employee discounts and EAP, all these things. It's making sure that A, the employees know about them, but B, you've got to give people personal reasons why they're relevant. So rather than saying we've got a pension scheme, it's more along the lines of thinking we're helping you save to give you future options. Make it more about, when you're communicating, make it more about what the employees will get from it, rather than just saying this is we've got this benefit, because that to most people doesn't really mean anything.
And that was the point I was about to make, because for most people, okay, working, getting paid a wage or a salary, the employer, and let's say if we focus on SMEs, most employers might have pensions, whether it's the government nest through schemes such as the nest schemes or enhanced pension for most professional jobs and stuff like that. There might be things as life assurance, and there may well be employee discounts, and maybe Pizza Friday and Fruits Wednesday and various other things. But the reality is that would be good for most employees. But for somebody who is really struggling, like you just said, that doesn't really help them much. So what practical steps can an employer, because I know, talking as an HR person, it's almost impossible for an employer to go in to say, well, you earn £1,500 a month. I demand that you spend 500 on your rent, and you spend 200 on food, and you spend this. You can't do that. It's down to the individual to manage their financial affairs. So what practical supports can an employer give employees?
Yeah, look, I think that last statement you made, I think that's an important one. And I'm guessing that other people that have come to speak about other elements of well-being, look, you can signpost things, but you ultimately, and I speak from a position of having dealt with issues of my own well-being and almost all the aspects. Ultimately, the individual has to take some responsibility at some point. And I don't mean to be mean about that, but there is only so much you can do, and an individual has to make that decision. And this is why you need to think about the way you communicate these things like the benefits to employees to emphasize the why to them, why this is important to them. When it comes to practical stuff, I mean, beyond hiring a consultant like me to come in and do things and run workshops, there are things you can do. The first and foremost thing I'd say is, particularly because debt is usually the thing that I think most of us fear, either being part of, or as HR people or business people, having employees that are struggling with it. And what you do. The government runs a free personal finance website called Money Helper. And that, in most answers, actually, even if your employees have got questions about pensions, but particularly if they've got issues around debt, that is first and foremost the place I would point people to. Now, Money Helper itself does have pages dedicated to tips and various other sort of informational posts around it. But crucially, it has links to proper charities that help people with this. Because actually, the next worst thing about debt is that there are a lot of not so nice people and organizations who would quite happily take advantage of your employees on that. And other people. So Money Helper, as anyone who's sat through my presentations, would be the first place. And the good news is it's not just on the debt, and it is also a good place for you to point employees to if they come to you with pension questions and questions about other things like mortgages, insurances and stuff. All of that information's there. It's also, and I think you mentioned, I think probably one of the first stages as far as working through with a group or an individual on getting into a better place financially and with their financial well-being. It has a budget tool. So the budget tool I like on Money Helper because it's free for a start, but also it's quite detailed and it allows you to save as you go along. Because undoubtedly what happens when we sit down to have a look at these things, and I think many people who've done this themselves will probably relate, you get there and it asks you a question about, I don't know, an insurance policy you have or your water bill, and you think, I've got no idea what that is. And it's good because there's an element of mindfulness to finances that people we don't often talk about. But ultimately, a lot of the issue is with people is their lack of confidence with money comes from not actually knowing what's going on with what they're managing already. And that's for lots of us, that's because it can be quite scary. We don't want to think of the bills coming out. But actually, in ripping that Band-Aid off, there's a lot of confidence that can come from there. So first and foremost, Money Helper is a good place to go. The second place is your pension provider. In most cases, alas, I say Nest isn't the one, but in most cases, most of the commercial providers have an offer as part of what your employees are paying for out their management charge pension, have services there. So most of them now, your Avivas, your Aegons, Scottish Widows, will have generic webinars that they'll be running for your employees, for anyone to access, actually I should say, that's a client, that people can go on to find out more information. They're not just about pensions. They do typically now stray into other areas as well. Many of your employees, in fact, I'd say most, will either be ignoring a lot of those emails or undoubtedly your firewalls will be blocking them because they'll identify them as spam fairly quickly. So I think that's one thing to be aware of, I guess, as the conduit, I would say. I think HR is a conduit for a lot of information and communications, particularly in SMEs. You need to be aware of what your provider is actually offering. And they will have a wide offering. They'll have tools on their mobile apps and online services. And a lot of them are now offering further things. I think the People's Pension have just come have just started the financial wellbeing smart pensions as well. Aviva, if anyone follows them on LinkedIn, I think have been posting regularly on their LinkedIn about their new financial wellbeing tool. And Aegon, who sponsored the Institute of Financial Wellbeing that I work with, they again have been leading in these financial wellbeing stuff. So there is loads of stuff that you probably get free from your pension provider. And as we all have to have workplace pensions, that would be the second place I'd go after Money Helper. The third place, because I'm beginning to sound like him, is Martin Lewis. Now, I know, and I was there, I think during COVID when Martin Lewis was talking about furlough, and I know he said some things that we kind of wish he hadn't, and there have been other things since. But generally, I would say that as someone who has worked in the industry for a long time, who is a financial advisor, most of the time he's right. And actually, I know because I was speaking to an HR person this morning. She was talking to me about salary sacrifice, and she's trying to get salary sacrifice through with her board who are over in Australia. And she was saying to me, I was watching this Martin Lewis show two or 3 weeks ago where Martin Lewis was talking about salary sacrifice, and I was literally sort of going, oh no, we just need to get it set up. But there's a really weird thing. Ever since I started in helping people with their money, there are things I dread. I dread the Daily Mail running articles on pensions or anything else, because I can guarantee it's probably going to have a negative spin, and I'm probably going to get a lot of very concerned or angry people. But Martin Lewis generally presents in quite a positive manner about these things, and the impact is good because him saying it, I don't know, I like to think I do positively influence, but him saying it will really get a big interest. And we've seen that. We see Martin Lewis spikes of. So he's very good. Most of his stuff's available on YouTube. The I'm going to get this wrong, MSE, Money Saving Expert, is also a very good place for people to understand, I guess, more wider things like energy bills and stuff like that, and student loans, particularly student loans. That is the website I would go if you want, because again, as we now know from media coverage over the last 6 months, there are a lot of differences in the type of student loans that people have. So actually being able to explain that even in half an hour is a lot. So pointing people in the direction of that kind of stuff. So those are three things. And then finally, there's Pension Awareness Day, which actually is Pension Awareness Week really now. pensionawarenessday.com. That's something that's put on by the pension industry for free every second week of September. And again, that features loads of quite lively videos and live webinars if you're there in the second week of September, with loads of stuff on pensions and more on there. So four different places I can point you to for free without needing to come to people like me, where you can help your employees and the workforces you're working with.
So thank you, Charlie. What I hear is there's lots of help out there and lots of places to look for free in terms of for information to help you understand your finances, your financial commitments, and to help you manage better through budgeting tools and through being aware of what you're actually spending, what you have coming in and what you have going out, and what's your effectively financial commitments, subscriptions, right? Because these days I was speaking to somebody earlier who mentioned the fact that someone they know didn't realize until they looked at their bill, why is the money coming out every time? So you may sign up to things either for trial or for whatever, and before you know it, you've been paying for that thing for a period of time, right? So
yeah, so I think, again, because I could give you tips all day, I'm quite happy to. I think the thing on that is, one thing that we now have more so than ever before in 2026 is technology. And as I say to employees, so I typically start with talking to them about the budget tool and Money Helper, because this is something that anyone has access to and is a fairly straightforward tool to use. But most banks now, particularly if you download their mobile apps, most banks now have within their banking app, I say AI, not sure whether that's true, but they certainly have a level of machine learning or modeling that is able to actually go into people's spending and give them a lot more information on what's coming in and out of their accounts. And I think using tools that your bank's probably already providing would be, again, a good way of saving yourself a lot of time. I mean, the technology is getting to a place now where you won't need to write your budget out because the banking app will already be able to do it for you. Now, many of us have multiple banks, or as I say, your banking app might not have quite caught up with the technology. There are agnostic apps that you can pay for, and I would always, particularly if you're sharing any data, and I've seen some things, and we'll probably get onto AI and ChatGPT and things in a minute, but if you're sharing any data, paid for services, so you will have to pay for these apps, but I'd suggest that's a good thing because it means that undoubtedly your data is a lot more protected than it would be if it was a free app. There are agnostic apps like Emma, like Money Hub, and some of the ones that we work with like Margie, who will enable people to connect their various bank accounts to one app and actually see all their finances. And a lot of those are now developing deeper tools that will enable people to plan things like their retirement incomes and stuff like that. So it is quite an exciting time, and there's technology is increasingly coming to our aid to take a lot of the hard work out of getting on top of our finances. So that, I think, is something, but that does involve employees either, well, in many cases, having to actually pay for something. But I'd say that investment's worth it.
Great. Thank you for that clarification and highlighting the role technology can play. And yes, I do think a lot of the banks now, if you log into their apps, especially, ask you whether you want to migrate all your accounts, not to them, but so that you have it all on one platform. And I think the security aspects of it is probably a whole conversation on its own that we're not going to go into because they will sidetrack us. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, we do have tools, we do have technologies, and we do have resources at hand that would help us with better financial planning, as well as, more importantly, that people like yourselves, experts out there that you can reach out and speak to, or there may be dedicated people through your employer, because some employers may have financial experts or planners, etc., through some of the schemes, the employee assistance schemes, etc., that they have in place. So basically trying to say, please do make use of resources available to you, especially if you start to struggle or before you start to struggle, so that you don't get to a panic state necessarily, because making emotional decisions about money can sometimes have long-term negative impacts, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important piece, which is we should be aware of the way that our emotions interact with our financial spending and kind of decision making. For many of us, the relationship with money has been crafted by lots of different things, from the situations we grew up in as children to our actual own experiences throughout life. As with many things, it's experience that shapes us. And I think it really does pay to be aware of those. There are negative thoughts that people can have around money. And I would say to people that, again, the first step, for instance, I was bad at maths and can't handle money, or I made a bad investment choice, and I think those thoughts are important, those experiences are important, but don't leave them unchallenged would be my recommendation to people. And also, actually, in most cases, there is a level of detail you could get into with money in the same way that you could get into a level of detail with cars. You could get and I have friends who are very interested in pulling apart cars, changing spark plugs, all this kind of thing. That probably shows just how little I know about cars. But the reality is we all drive them and they get us from A to B. And actually, for the main part, most of us can use a car to get from A to B without needing to know that level of detail. Yes, of course, there are times at which when we break down things where probably we wish we knew more, but actually in most cases money isn't too different for the majority of us. I very much have a belief now, having worked in this for a long time and worked with a range of different people, from, as I said, those people at high net worth to the employees of clients we have that may be working in low paid factory or retail or restaurant jobs. One thing that I can absolutely guarantee is that I would not assume on any level that the person in working in financial services at a pension company knows any more than that person that's on the factory floor. They may think they know more, which is almost more dangerous. But in my experience, I think that's true, and it really does play into also those things that we start talking about at the start, that high and low earners can both experience very similar problems. But the second thing that I would say is that there's a lot of talk around the financial advice gap, and the government is trying to do various things to deal with that. I think, and particularly with the improving technology, actually, that isn't the problem for most people. In my experience, probably 5 to 10% of your workforce will actually need proper formal financial advice. And that's typically because of the complexities of their specific situations. Probably because they do have a lot of money, probably because they have run out of pension allowance to pay and things like that. Those are the people that definitely do need it. But actually, probably for 90% of your workforce, that's not really what they need. My belief from what I've experienced is that for most people, it's what I'd call an action gap. The information and the tools that most people need to do the fairly standard things within their life, like figuring out their budgets, figuring out how much to pay into their pension, figuring how much they need in terms of insurance and things like that, and then the educational information that they need to understand those things, are freely available from reputable places on the internet, and certainly through things like their workplace pension provider or EAP. The trouble is action. And that's really what I would say a financial well-being strategy should consider, is how can we get people to actually access the stuff that's readily available to them. And from an HR point of view or from an employer point of view, I think a lot of that is getting the communication right and making it easy for people to access the information and the tools that will help them with those particular financial issues.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point. I mean, you've touched on a few issues there. One is the fact that we've been discussing when people are having financial difficulties, etc. But there's also that flip side of it when people have a bit of extra and they want to save, they want to invest, and they want to make the right choices. There is also that aspect of financial well-being, because if you do end up making the right choices, then that will help you long-term wise, even during periods when things are not so good. So there is that better financial planning aspects of it. And you also touch on the fact that you can put everything in place, right? But if people are not taking action, if they're not being proactive and tapping into them and or assessing them effectively, people aren't accessing what they need to, then the thing is there, it's nice, it's shiny, it's flowery, but it wouldn't really benefit the people that is designed to benefit. So it is quite important to take that into account. The fact that we need to communicate what is available, because sometimes the very issue of yes, information is freely available and you can find it here, you can find it there. It's that people get overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there. And sometimes that in itself can be off-putting to people and can be a barrier to people accessing things, right? So I think what we can do is sometimes break those information down into bite size and chunks that people can really process, focus, etc. on, and to encourage them to take action. And that's all we can do, right? Signpost, make the provisions, give people opportunity, and encourage them to do it.
Yeah, I think, and this kind of comes back to where we began, which is, I think you've got to set your own boundaries as the employer as to what you can do, and there are lots of things that sit well out of your control. And that is really important. That's really important for your well-being as the employer or as the HR person there. And I can tell you, because this is very personal to me, this is very much, financial well-being is very much my passion. It is really important to set boundaries and accept what you can do and accept what's outside of your control. Yeah. The way that we're developing things and a lot of the opportunity of working with Everyone has been about us looking at how we can develop effective ways of actually making real change. Because again, having spoken to other HR consultants, other people who've been working on this, because financial wellbeing has kind of been embedded now, I think, probably 2020 with COVID was probably the big moment, really, when I think everyone began to take it a bit more seriously. But a lot of what I hear when I'm talking to people, perhaps people who don't even know what I do, is that they've put in things and it's not working. You really need, firstly, you need to be realistic about what you're trying to achieve. Secondly, though, I think what we've missed is having a clear plan and being able to look at the steps of progress we're making. And it's really important whenever, again, you set a goal that you're able to track your progress and see what's that, because otherwise it will become really disheartening. The technology is coming, and as I say, those money apps, those dashboards. You know, there's Margie, there's Montago, there's probably others out there in the employer world at the moment, in the employee benefits world at the moment, which will track it at a employer level for you, give you data that's not individual, but give you data that will talk to you about how your employees' well-being, financial well-being is going and how it's improving or not. It will give you, certainly I know from the work with Margie, it will give you information on, it will ask your employees direct questions and it will give you that feedback. We work with a client who had put in payroll lending, so they'd put in a service that enables people to access their salary before they've received it. The idea being, and their concern being, that they were trying to address was people were struggling with cash flow. And this can happen when you're moving, particularly from like a weekly payroll to a monthly payroll. And I've seen it over the years. But the trouble was that they were finding that people were still in the debt cycle because they were spending that money and then they were stuck, and it became, and you see, that is an example, I guess, of a financial well-being strategy that's very well-meaning, but actually it hasn't solved the problem. In fact, it's just, I'd say it's
prolonged it or made it worse.
Yeah, and I would say, and I'm going to be careful because I guess I do have feelings about payroll lending, but I think if you're going to do it, you really need to think about what the strategy is to deal with the longer term problem of how to get people out. I mean, it's hard. This client is in London. Interestingly, we were talking about the difference between, and I thought this, and then we moved on, between that higher and lower earners have the same, can end up with the same problems because their higher earners are spending in a proportional way to their income. there's some really interesting research that shows regionally that incomes, I think the Northeast, in terms of your income and as far as it will go in terms of disposable income, is significantly better than it is almost in anywhere else. And then you come to London and incomes might be higher, but in terms of the costs of living in London, for instance, not just the housing and rental costs, but also as people famously say, particularly my friends coming down from the north, it's how much for a pint in London. You pay a London premium, and we've had in the past, haven't we? London waiting in jobs. This is true, and actually, if you're working for a national company, your employees in different areas will have different problems, or not, depending. If they're in Newcastle, it might be a bit better if they're earning the same as someone in Cornwall, for instance, or in the southeast. So these are the things, and again, I think having data and being able to actually, I mean, as we know, you've got to have something that you're measuring really if you're working towards a target. And I think that's important. Again, using the technology that's increasingly becoming available to employers is something to think about.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlie, for such an insightful discussion and for your honesty around the work you do and how sharing some of the experiences, etc., with us. It's really timely topic and very relevant to a lot of people either end, and whichever way we look at it, we all need to be mindful of our finances and our financial well-being, because it does generally impact and help our well-being overall. And thank you very much for, again, always being available to support and to help us in any shape that you can. We truly appreciate it. And if anyone listening to us has any question about anything that we've discussed, please do get in touch and we'll be more than happy to address it. You can contact us via HR Voices at hrindependence.co.uk and any questions. Thank you once again, and speak to you all again soon. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Mary.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.